My name is Evelyn Margaret Dalton. I am 72 years old, and most days I feel every one of those years, except for certain moments, like on late spring mornings when the sun spills through my kitchen window and hits the old porcelain teapot just right. That's when I remember. Inside, I'm still the girl who once danced barefoot in the rain. I live alone now in a tidy sunlit apartment on the third floor of an old building that overlooks the river. My days are simple and measured. The mornings are for tea and radio music, the afternoons for reading, a little cleaning, sometimes feeding the birds out on the narrow balcony. It's not loneliness exactly, more like a quiet that settled over everything. Richard, my husband, has been gone for 31 years. His absence is part of the landscape now, a familiar contour in the shape of my days. He was kind, gentle, had a talent for fixing anything, watches, radios, even broken hearts. After he died suddenly, my world contracted to a single point. My daughter, Sarah. She was only 8, all wild hair and stubborn spirit, suddenly fatherless. I did what I could. I worked as a secretary at the city library, took in some sewing to make ends meet, and spent every evening at home. Sarah was my joy, my purpose, the anchor that kept me upright through storms. Every birthday, every scraped knee, every small victory at school, I stored away in my memory like rare coins in a box. She grew, and I tried to keep up, with her tastes, her friends, the way she changed her handwriting every year, and later, the way she kept secrets as all teenagers do. There were hard years too, but even in the worst of them, I found something to cherish. Her laugh, the soft curve of her cheek as she slept, the way she called me Mum when she was frightened or needed comfort. Now Sarah is 39. She lives across the city, busy with her work at the hospital, with a fiancé named Robert and a life of dinner parties and yoga classes. We see each other as often as schedules allow. Mostly Sunday dinners, occasional coffee dates. I never want to be a burden, so I tread lightly, making myself small, useful, pleasant. There are not many things I have held on to, not after so many moves, downsizing, and years of letting go. A handful of books, an old photo album, Richard's wedding ring in a velvet box, and one other thing, my wedding dress. It hangs in the back of my wardrobe, preserved with the kind of care reserved for the sacred, wrapped in muslin, hidden in a faded cardboard box. Every year on the anniversary of my wedding in May, I take it out. I lay it across my bed, smooth the sleeves, touch the tiny mother of pearl buttons. I breathe in the faint scent of lavender sachets and thyme. I iron it carefully, pressing out imaginary wrinkles, whispering to myself as if I were still that young bride with the trembling hands and hopeful heart. For 42 years, I have kept that dress safe. I always thought, or maybe just hoped, that one day Sarah might want to wear it, or at least try it on, laugh, spin before the mirror, see herself as part of a long, unbroken line. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was just my way of holding on to something that felt too important to lose. Now, as her own wedding approaches, the dress feels heavier than ever in my arms. It is a symbol of everything I want to give her: history, memory, love made visible in fabric and thread. All I have left are a few things, a few memories, and that dress, pressed and waiting, a secret hope I've carried for most of my life. Sarah called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice rushed but warm, layered with the static of city life. "Mom, can you bring the dress when you come over Thursday? I have a fitting, and Robert's sister will be there. She's bringing her friend from the shop, the one who can help with alterations. I thought maybe we could look at it together." For 2 days I prepared. I aired the dress out on a hanger by the open window, letting the soft May breeze whisper through the lace. I pressed it with the old iron, careful around the delicate sleeves, and wrapped it in tissue paper as if it were made of spun sugar. I packed it into the box, a faded white, corners worn soft by decades of hands opening it for anniversaries, for memory, for hope. The morning of the fitting, I woke before dawn. Nerves fluttered in my chest. I made tea but forgot to drink it. I slipped into my best blouse, the one with small pearl buttons, and a navy skirt. Before leaving, I glanced in the hall mirror, smoothing stray wisps of gray hair behind my ears. "It's just a dress," I whispered to my reflection. "And Sarah's day." But my hands trembled as I gathered up the box. The city bustled as I rode the bus, my lap full of white cardboard and expectation. I watched young couples get on and off, carrying groceries and flowers, laughing in private languages. I felt a little out of place, an old woman with a secret treasure, moving through a world that had grown faster and brighter than the one I remembered. Sarah's apartment was full of light, filtered through wide windows that looked out onto busy streets. There were bouquets in vases, shoes lined up by the door, and the faint aroma of coffee and citrus in the air. She greeted me with a quick hug, her phone pressed to her ear, already answering a call from the caterer. "Just set it in the living room, Mom. I'll be there in a second." I set the box gently on the coffee table, careful not to disturb the glossy bridal magazines and a crystal vase of lilies. I sat on the edge of the sofa, waiting, listening to the laughter and voices in the next room. Sarah's voice, quick, confident, amused, mingled with a younger, higher laugh, her soon-to-be sister-in-law, Lily. There was another woman, too, whom Sarah introduced when she came in, cheeks flushed from laughter. "This is Devon. She works at Atelier Lumiere. She's amazing with vintage." Devon smiled, polite and perfumed, her eyes sweeping over the box. "Is this the famous dress?" she asked. Lily giggled, perching beside her. "Mom's kept it forever," Sarah said, her tone affectionate but slightly dismissive, as if excusing an eccentricity. I opened the box, my hand steady but my heart unsteady. Layer by layer, I peeled back the tissue, revealing the dress. Ivory, with soft lace at the sleeves, a fitted waist, a gentle skirt that had once brushed the floor of a small church aisle in 1983. The sunlight caught on the beading at the collar, making it glimmer like dew. For a moment there was quiet, a small sacred pause. Then Sarah stepped forward, reaching out to touch the sleeve. She pinched the fabric between her fingers. Wow, Mom, it's really old." Lily snorted, covering her mouth with her hand. "It's vintage," she said with a wink at Devon. "But I think even the store would call this classic." Devon leaned in, peering at the seams. "The craftsmanship is beautiful. They don't make them like this anymore." Her voice was professional, kind, but distant, like she was talking about a relic in a museum. Sarah turned to me, smiling, but her eyes a little too bright, her voice a little too loud. "Mom, you're not the same. It's different now. Dresses are lighter, you know? More modern." She looked back at Lily, who nodded, lips pressed together to hold back laughter. The words landed softly, but they stayed. I pressed my hands together in my lap. My chest tightened. The salesman, Devon's friend, stood back, watching, offering no words, only a practiced smile. Sarah held the dress up, examining it as though it were a stranger's garment. "I mean, you must have been so tiny, Mom. I can't believe you fit into this." Lily laughed openly now. "It looks like it belongs in one of those heritage displays." I managed a smile, folding the fabric back with careful hands, each movement practiced and precise. I didn't want to break, not in front of them. "No worries," Devon said quickly, sensing the tension. "We can look at some options for Sarah's silhouette. Maybe some details could inspire your final choice." But Sarah had already lost interest. She put the dress back in the box, patted my arm, and turned to Devon. "Let's look at the new designs," she said, her tone bright and final. I sat quietly on the sofa as they brought out swatches and glossy photos of silk and tulle as laughter swirled around me. I watched my daughter, tall, elegant, full of new life, standing at the threshold of her future, while my past lay quietly folded beside me. I felt the sharp edge of humiliation, but I swallowed it whole. When the fitting was over, I stood. "Thank you for letting me bring it, Sarah." My voice was small, but even. She kissed my cheek, distracted, already chatting about the next appointment. "Of course, Mom. I know it meant a lot to you." I picked up the box, heavier now, and walked slowly to the door. No one stopped me. No one said another word about the dress. That evening, the city felt colder than usual as I stepped off the bus and began the walk back to my apartment. The box was heavy against my chest, not from weight, but from everything that had been packed into it. Years, dreams, now all pressed tight by disappointment. I climbed the narrow staircase to my door, listening to my own footsteps echo up the empty hall. Each step felt like another year piling onto my shoulders. Inside, I slipped off my shoes, set the box on the dining table, and stood staring at it in the fading light. The apartment was quiet except for the ticking of the clock and the distant hum of traffic. I went through the motions, putting the kettle on, folding my cardigan over the back of a chair. But my thoughts drifted back to Sarah's living room, the bright sunlight, the laughter that turned the air sharp. I ran a hand along the top of the box, feeling the faint impressions where my name and Richard's had once been written in looping blue ink. Our old address had faded, but I could still trace it with my finger. It struck me, in that moment, how little remains. A name, a memory, a piece of cloth. I sat down and, with deliberate care, untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. The dress lay inside as it always did, waiting. I took it out, draping it over my arms, the fabric whispering in soft folds. It was not as white as it once was, the lace now the color of butter, the silk gone slightly translucent at the seams. I pressed it to my face and breathed in deeply. The scent was a mix of lavender and old cedar, a fragrance so familiar that for a second I could almost hear Richard's laughter, the way he'd twirl a curl of my hair around his finger while we danced in our little living room, the radio playing something scratchy and sweet. I thought about Sarah as a child, how she'd once played dress-up with my shoes, her laughter ringing down the hall, how she used to beg for stories about when I was young. I had hoped, maybe foolishly, that she'd want to step into those memories, even if only for a moment. But people change. Time moves forward, and the world Sarah lives in is not the one I built with Richard. She has her own taste, her own dreams, ones not woven from the same threads as mine. Still, the words from the fitting clung to me. "You're not the same, Mom. It's different now." Maybe I wasn't the same. Maybe I was even smaller now, folded up like this dress, easily set aside in favor of something newer, lighter, untouched by years. A heaviness pressed against my chest, but I refused to cry. I had learned long ago to save my tears for later. Instead, I moved through my little evening rituals, feeding the cat on the landing, watering the violets on the windowsill, winding the clock on the mantel. The dress stayed with me, draped across the armchair, watching. I sat at the table, the box open, the dress spilling over the edge, and I made myself remember. The wedding day, sun slanting through the church windows, the music, Richard's hand trembling in mine. The reception, nothing grand, but laughter, toasts, a cake made by my sister, and the certainty that I was loved. The years that followed not always easy, but woven through with moments of such tenderness that they had become golden threads in the tapestry of my life. It struck me then that this dress wasn't just fabric, it was my proof, of hope, of love, of endurance. I realized, as the shadows lengthened across the carpet, that the real sorrow was not that Sarah didn't want it. The sorrow was that the story it held might never be seen by anyone at all. I folded it gently, smoothing the sleeves, tucking the edges just so, and sat with it in my lap until the city lights blinked on across the river. I remembered something I'd read in the newspaper, a small gallery not far from here that did exhibitions on the theme of personal memory, a place where ordinary objects became windows into entire lives. An idea began to take root, not with anger, not as revenge, but as a gentle insistence. If the past could not live on in Sarah's future, then perhaps it could live somewhere else, for someone else to see. I sat for a long time, the apartment silent except for the low whir of the refrigerator and the rustle of evening wind against the glass. I thought about how memory is not something you can give, like a gift. It's something you share, or else it's lost. And so, late that night, I found myself opening the drawer where I kept my best stationery. I ran my fingers over the blue ruled paper and picked up my favorite pen, the one I used for birthday cards, condolence notes, anything that mattered. I began to write. That night, the dress did not go back in the box. Instead, I draped it over the back of my armchair, as though expecting a guest. It stayed there the next morning, glowing in the new light. The room seemed changed by its presence, as if the dress had drawn some unseen boundary between the past and the days to come. I made tea, the kind I used to drink with Richard on weekends. Earl Grey, faintly citrus. I sipped it slowly at my small kitchen table, the blue light of dawn slanting in, and thought about what it would mean to let the dress go. I found myself thinking not only of Sarah, but of all the women I'd known whose stories had vanished into attic trunks, whose wedding dresses had turned to yellow lace and forgotten silk, whose lives had been measured in quiet acts of hope and keeping. Mid-morning, after breakfast, dishes were washed and stacked. I took out the gallery's notice from where I'd clipped it on the fridge. The memory room, that was what they called themselves. They asked for stories, objects as vessels of meaning. We honor the quiet artifacts that shape us. I read that phrase again and again, letting it settle in my bones. Was my dress, my story, worthy of being seen? I sat down at my old writing desk, its oak surface worn smooth by decades of letters, bills, and crosswords. For a while, I stared at the blank page. I hesitated, wondering if this was foolish, if it was pride disguised as sentiment. But I remembered how I'd felt, watching Sarah turn away from the dress with laughter in her voice, how something inside me had twisted, then hardened. So I began. To the curators of the memory room, my name is Evelyn Dalton. I am 72, a widow, and the mother of one daughter. I am writing to ask if you might consider a piece of my life for your next exhibition. I have kept my wedding dress for 42 years. It is not elaborate, ivory with lace at the sleeves, a row of mother-of-pearl buttons, hand-sewn by a neighbor who no longer lives on this earth. I wore it the day I married Richard, who was lost to me too soon. After his death, I raised our daughter alone. Every year on our anniversary, I pressed the dress and remembered. I hoped one day my daughter might wear it, or at least want to. She did not. Tastes change, and so does the world. Still, the dress has kept its shape, and so have the memories inside it. When I look at it, I remember sunlight through stained glass, nervous laughter, my husband's hands, the warmth of a family that no longer exists except in my keeping. I suppose I'm offering this dress not because I expect anyone else to love it as I do, but because I want someone, anyone, to understand that it mattered. I paused, the words caught in my throat. I remembered the way Richard used to say, "Write it like you mean it, Evie." So I did. If there is room in your gallery for a life stitched together by hope and endurance, for a dress that was meant to begin a story and ended up containing all of it, I would be honored if you considered mine. I signed my name, folded the letter carefully, and took out my old camera, the one Sarah gave me the year she started college. I laid the dress out on the bed, arranging it so the lace caught the light, so the shadows revealed the curve of the skirt and the careful seams. I took a handful of pictures, reviewing each one, making sure the dress looked not sad, but dignified, like something that had survived. It took me the rest of the day to find an envelope large enough to make sure everything was packed just right. The letter, the printed photo, a copy of my phone number on a neat little card. I hesitated before sealing it, running my hand over the smooth paper, wondering if I was about to lose something I could never replace. Then I remembered the feeling in Sarah's living room, the sound of her laughter at what I loved. The humiliation had passed, replaced by a need that was sharper, clearer, to be seen, if not by my family, then by the world. That evening, I walked to the post office in the golden dusk. The world was settling, traffic slowing, the air tinged with lilacs from a neighbor's bush. I stood in line behind a young woman with a stroller and a man mailing business envelopes, feeling both old and strangely young at the same time. When it was my turn, I slid the envelope across the counter, my hands no longer trembling. "Special delivery, please," I said. The clerk glanced at the address, then at me. She smiled. "That's a lovely gallery. They do nice shows." I nodded, but didn't explain. I simply paid, took my receipt, and stepped outside. I felt taller, lighter, as though I had unburdened myself of something that had grown too heavy to carry alone. Back at home, the armchair was empty, but the room did not feel emptier. I stood at the window as night fell, the river catching the last traces of light, and let myself hope. For the first time in many years, I didn't know what tomorrow might bring. But for tonight, that felt almost like a promise. A week passed before the gallery called. It was a Thursday morning just after breakfast. I was wiping crumbs from the table when the phone rang, the old rotary shuddering in its cradle. "Hello, is this Mrs. Dalton?" The voice was young, gentle, professional. "Yes, this is she. This is Margot from the memory room. We received your letter and your photograph. We'd be honored to include your dress in our next exhibition. The way you wrote about it, it moved us. Would you be willing to bring it in for display? The opening is next Friday." For a moment, I simply listened to the hum on the line, surprised by the ache in my chest, an ache that felt a little like joy. "Yes," I managed, my voice steadier than I expected. "Yes, of course." After I hung up, I stood in the middle of my kitchen, hands clasped at my chest, and let the news settle over me like warm sunlight. My dress, the dress would be seen, not as a relic, not as a joke, but as something that mattered. I felt my breath return, deeper and slower, as if I'd been underwater for years and had only now come up for air. For the next several days, I became absorbed in preparation. I ironed the dress once more carefully than ever before, misting it lightly and pressing each seam flat with the tip of the iron. I patched a tiny tear at the hem, invisible to most, but not to me. I wrote out a label card in my neatest hand, just in case, with the dress's date and a short note about Richard, and about Sarah, and about all the ordinary hopes stitched into its seams. On the morning of the opening, I woke before dawn, too restless for breakfast. The apartment seemed to glow with anticipation. The dress draped across my bed, the letter from the gallery propped on the mantel. I dressed slowly, a simple navy dress, my mother's pearl earrings, a hint of rose powder. I pulled out a small clutch, tucking a packet of tissues inside, just in case. Carrying the dress on its padded hanger, covered with muslin, I made my way to the gallery by taxi. The city was coming awake, bakeries opening, children hustling to school, sunlight glittering off the river. I watched it all through the cab window, thinking of other journeys, other firsts. The day I wore the dress for the first time, the day I brought Sarah home from the hospital, the day I said goodbye to Richard. The memory room was nestled on a quiet street behind the old opera house. Its front window was filled with an ever-changing display of objects: a child's red shoes, a battered leather suitcase, a patchwork quilt. Today, the window was being rearranged for the new exhibition, Inheritance, the Things We Keep. I saw my own name, Evelyn Dalton, printed small on a placard, and my hands fluttered to my throat. Inside, the space was white and airy, with sunlight falling in soft squares across the polished floor. The curator, Margot, greeted me at the door with a kind smile. "We're so glad you're here. Would you like to see where we'll display your dress?" She led me to the main room, where a glass display case stood in the center. The case was empty but for a white satin form. I handed her the dress, breath catching as she lifted it, so careful, so respectful. Together we arranged it, slipping it onto the form, adjusting the sleeves, spreading the skirt just so. I watched as the silk and lace took on a new life in the gallery light, no longer yellowed but glowing, as if illuminated from within by all the memories it held. Above the display, Margot placed a placard with my words: "Saved 42 years. Turns out in vain." But beneath, in smaller print, "But even the things left behind can become a testament to the lives we've lived." I felt tears gather at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away. Instead, I smoothed my dress and took a seat along the far wall, watching as the room filled with the quiet murmur of guests. Strangers drifted in, reading the placards, pausing before my dress. I watched them, young women, older couples, a group of art students, stop and linger, their faces changing as they read. Some touched their own clothing, as if reminded of something hidden at the back of their closets, or in a cedar chest. A few wiped away tears, quietly, respectfully. For the first time in years, I felt entirely present. I was not just Sarah's mother, or Richard's widow, or an old woman carrying a box on the bus. I was Evelyn, the keeper of a story that now belonged, even briefly, to everyone who looked at that dress. At one point, Margot pressed my hand and said softly, "It's rare that an object resonates like this. People see themselves in it. That's a kind of gift." I smiled shyly, surprised by a wave of pride. I wandered the gallery, letting myself be just another guest. I listened to the snippets of conversation around the dress. "My grandmother had one just like it." "Imagine saving something so long, hoping someone would care." "It's beautiful, even if it's old. Maybe because it's old." No one laughed. No one dismissed it. The humiliation I'd carried since Sarah's living room faded, replaced by a sense of quiet vindication. Late in the evening, I took one last look at the display. The dress stood luminous under the gallery lights, finally seen, finally valued, not for its style or its age, but for its story and for mine. I thanked Margot, accepted her warm embrace, and stepped out into the night, the cool air bracing on my cheeks. I walked slowly to the bus stop, my head high, feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I understood. Sometimes what we keep for ourselves must eventually belong to the world. Sometimes the act of letting go is its own kind of keeping. The week after the opening, word about the exhibition quietly spread, first in a column in the local paper, then among Sarah's circles, though I didn't know it at the time. For a few days, my world felt altered. Strangers had stopped me on the street to say they'd seen the dress. Margot had called to say the gallery was getting more visitors than usual, and some left handwritten notes for the woman with the dress. I tucked these fragments into my days like new seeds, grateful, a little dazed. Sarah hadn't mentioned the exhibition at all. Our phone calls remained clipped, practical, wedding details, recipes, whether I'd need a ride to the ceremony. I sensed a quiet tension in her tone, a question pressing at the edges, never voiced. I wondered whether she'd read about the dress, or if someone had told her. Perhaps she was simply busy, or perhaps she was hurt. I didn't know. Then, on a rainy Sunday, Sarah called, unexpected, her voice brisk but tentative. "Hi, Mom. Are you home? I thought I might stop by." I told her yes, my heart thumping unreasonably, though I tried to keep my voice steady. I said about making tea, arranging the biscuits on the little blue plate she liked as a child. The river pressed gray and swollen against its banks, and the room seemed smaller, the air thick with things unsaid. Sarah arrived with damp hair and an umbrella dripping on the mat. She shrugged off her coat, glancing around the apartment with a restlessness I recognized from her childhood, the same way she used to look for monsters under her bed. She didn't sit right away. She walked to the window, peered out at the river, then turned back to me, face pale, eyes too bright. "I saw the exhibition," she said abruptly. I set the teapot down, not trusting myself to meet her gaze. My hands were calm. My heart was not. "Oh?" She let out a breath, half a laugh, half a sigh. "I didn't know. I saw your name in the paper. Robert's mother clipped it and sent it to me." She paused. "It's really there, Mom, in the middle of the room, like it's the most important thing in the world." There was a silence, waited, as if the river itself was holding its breath. Sarah took a seat, perching at the edge of the sofa, her knees tight together, hands wringing. "Did you really put that on display?" she asked, her voice sharper than she meant. There was accusation, but something else too, bewilderment, a hurt that sounded strangely young. I studied her face, searching for the child I'd known. "Yes," I said quietly. "They asked for stories, things that mattered. I thought maybe someone should see it, since you didn't want it." She looked away, jaw set. "It's not that I didn't care. It's just, it's not me, Mom. Things are different now." She twisted her hands, then burst out, "But it's my story too. You put it out there for everyone." I let the silence rest between us, refusing to rush in with apologies. My voice, when it came, was gentle but sure. "I didn't put it out. I liberated it. It was never just a dress, Sarah. Not for me, and not for you, if you'd wanted it. But you didn't. And I couldn't watch it disappear quietly into a box, as if the life I made all those years had never happened. It needed to be seen. By someone. By anyone." She blinked, bracing herself. "People are talking, you know. Robert's family, my friends. They all think it's so sad." I smiled, just a little, not unkindly. "Is it sad, Sarah? Or is it just honest?" She swallowed, her voice low. "I don't know. Maybe both." I poured tea, the small clatter of cups filling the silence. The rain thickened against the glass. For a long while, we said nothing. I watched her, not as my child, but as another woman, one struggling with inheritance, with the weight of what to keep and what to let go. Finally, Sarah looked up, her expression softer. "People cried at the gallery. I saw it. I I guess it means something, even if it's not for me." I nodded, a warmth spreading through my chest that wasn't pride or victory, but something like release. "That's enough," I said, "for me." She sat back, picking at the hem of her sleeve, as if considering all the words she'd left unsaid. "Will you come to my final fitting?" she asked quietly. "Of course," I replied, matching her gentleness. "I'd love to." We drank our tea in silence, mother and daughter, no longer talking about the dress, but sharing something older, quieter, and far less fragile. Later, after she'd left, I went to the gallery alone, standing in the hush, the echo of visitors' footsteps fading behind me. I looked at the dress, not a wound anymore, not even a trophy, but a thing set free. I understood at last that my story didn't have to be hers, and that was all right. The dress stayed in the gallery long after the opening. Weeks stretched into months, and with every visit I made, it seemed to grow less like a possession and more like a part of the world's memory. I found myself returning to the memory room on quiet afternoons, when the crowds had thinned, standing among strangers who whispered in reverence or simply gazed in silence at the silk and lace, as if it contained a secret language only their hearts could hear. Sometimes I watched from the bench by the window, the river glinting beyond the glass, and studied the faces that lingered near the case, an older woman in a navy coat wiping her eyes, a young man photographing the display for his mother, a pair of sisters arguing softly in front of the placard. A mother explained to her daughter, this belonged to someone who wanted to remember. Their voices floated in the hush, adding new chapters to a story that no longer belonged only to me. One afternoon, a handwritten note appeared beneath the display. My mother kept hers too. I wish I'd asked her about it. Thank you for reminding me. I folded it into my purse, a keepsake not of the dress itself, but of the shared ache of longing and remembrance that all of us, it seemed, carried. Sarah's wedding approached, the weeks measured in fittings and tastings, guest lists, and weather forecasts. She chose a silk dress, modern, unadorned, the color of pale cream, with a train that fluttered like the wing of a swan. I watched her move through her preparations, confident, at ease, surrounded by friends and laughter. She wore her hair up, pinned with fresh gardenias, and her father's watch, newly repaired, on her wrist. The day itself arrived clear and warm, a day full of light and subtle wind, the river shining just as it had so many years ago when I first wore my own dress. I took my seat in the church, a simple bouquet of lilies in my lap, and let myself watch as a guest, seeing Sarah as she wished to be seen, radiant and new. The ceremony was brief, the vows tender and plain spoken. Sarah glanced at me once as she said, I do. And in that glance I read not apology, but understanding, a recognition of the thread that ran from her to me, invisible but unbroken. Afterward, at the reception, Robert's mother embraced me, whispering, Your story moved all of us. Thank you for sharing it. I smiled, accepting the grace in her words, feeling for the first time that I had given something lasting, even if it wasn't what I had first hoped. That evening, I returned to my apartment, no longer empty, but full of quiet certainty. I poured a glass of wine and sat by the open window, watching the lights from the boats move up and down the river. The city hummed with its own life, indifferent but beautiful. There were moments in the days that followed when I would miss the dress. I missed the weight of it in my hands, the ritual of pressing and folding, the way it filled the apartment with possibility every May. But I did not regret letting it go. Its story, once too heavy for just one heart, had found room to breathe in the world. I learned that memory is not something you pass on like an heirloom. It is not inherited in silk and lace, or even in photographs, but in the courage to share what mattered and then to let go. The dress was never really meant for Sarah. It was meant for me, to keep, to mourn, to love, and finally to release. Now, when I think of my life, I see it not as a collection of things, but as a sequence of quiet offerings, a cup of tea, a mended sleeve, a story told, a dress displayed behind glass. I am no longer waiting to be seen. I am content to know that somewhere, among the visitors to the gallery, someone will pause and remember the shape of hope, stitched long ago into a wedding gown. The world keeps moving. Sarah is married now, beginning her own story, unburdened by mine. And I have become my own witness. The dress stays in the museum, and I am free.